They tore my gate down while I was out of town, didn't call, didn't leave a message, didn't even have the decency to pretend they had permission. And when I got back, standing there looking at what used to be my driveway, I realized real quick this wasn't just some misunderstanding. This was someone deciding they had more say over my land than I did, and that's the kind of thing that sticks with you. I remember pulling up that afternoon, truck still dusty from a 3-day fishing trip out by Lake Benton, sun just starting to drop behind the trees, and something fell off before I even turned into the drive, like when your gut catches up to something your eyes haven't fully processed yet. I slowed down, rolled forward, and then it hit me. The gate was gone. Not open gone. Just open space where it had always been, like someone knocked a tooth out of the face of my property. I parked, stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, and there it was off to the side of the yard, twisted iron, bent hinges, the arch I spent weeks welding by hand, just tossed in a pile, like scrap metal nobody wanted. That gate wasn't just something I bought and bolted on. I built that thing in my shop over the course of a winter, nights after work, heater humming in the corner, radio playing low, my dad's old welding mask hanging on the wall. I put my family name across the top, cut it clean, polished it myself. It meant something. And now it looked like it got dragged behind a truck and dumped like trash. There was a piece of paper taped to one of my fence posts, bright yellow, flapping in the wind like it had something important to say. I walked over, peeled it off, and read it twice just to make sure I wasn't missing something. Removed per HOA safety compliance. That was it. No name, no number, just that line like it explained everything. I actually laughed at first, not because it was funny, but because it didn't make sense. My property isn't part of any HOA, never has been. I bought those 5 acres specifically to stay out of that kind of thing. No committees, no approval forms, no one telling me what color my mailbox should be. Just land, my workshop, a couple trucks, and the space to do what I want without someone peeking over a clipboard. Now right next to my land, that's a different story. There's this gated community, real polished, real curated, brick walls lining the entrance, trimmed hedges like they got a schedule, security cameras tucked into corners, keypad entry, the whole deal. You drive past it, and you can tell exactly what they're selling, quiet, clean, controlled. And then there's my side, little rougher around the edges, sure, but honest, tools out, projects half done, trucks that actually get used. I never had a problem with them, and as far as I knew, they didn't have one with me either, at least not one they said out loud. But standing there looking at that note, I started connecting a few dots. There'd been looks before, subtle things, like when I'd be working near the road and one of their residents would slow down just a little too much, or when a delivery driver would ask if they were in the right place, because this doesn't look like the rest of the neighborhood. Nothing you can point at directly, just that quiet kind of judgment that hangs in the air. I crumpled the paper in my hand and tossed it onto the pile of bent metal, and I just stood there for a minute, trying to decide if this was stupidity or something worse. That's when my neighbor Carl pulled up along the fence line, window already halfway down before he even stopped. Carl's been around longer than most, owns the property on the other side of mine, the kind of guy who notices everything without making a big deal about it. He leaned out and said, "You see what they did?" I nodded, still looking at the gate. "You know who?" I asked, even though I had a feeling. He let out a short breath and said, "That new HOA president, name's Ethan Caldwell. Moved in about a year ago. Real particular guy, likes things a certain way." I turned and looked at him. Particular enough to tear down someone else's property? Carl gave me that look like he didn't want to say too much, but also didn't want to lie. "They had a crew out here yesterday morning. I figured you knew about it." I shook my head slowly, and something inside me shifted right then. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet kind of clarity settling in. "Did they say anything?" I asked. Carl shrugged. "He was here, that Caldwell guy, talking about visibility, safety, how your gate was interrupting the visual flow of the entrance." I couldn't help it. I smiled a little at that visual flow. That's what they called it. Not property damage, not trespassing, visual flow. Carl looked at me and added, "Didn't sit right with me, but you know how those HOA folks are." Yeah, I was starting to get a clearer picture of that. After Carl drove off, I walked over to the pile again and crouched down, running my hand along one of the bent bars. The welds had been clean, strong. They didn't just take it down, they cut through it like it was in their way. And that's when it really hit me. This wasn't about safety. and it sure wasn't about some paperwork mistake. This was about control, about someone deciding my place didn't match the image they wanted for theirs. I stood up, looked out toward the road that ran along the edge of my land, the same road that led straight into their pristine little neighborhood, and for the first time, I didn't just see it as a road. I saw it for what it actually was, something that existed on my land, something they used every single day without thinking twice about who owned it. And just like that, the whole situation stopped being confusing and started becoming very, very clear. If they wanted to treat my property like it was theirs to manage, then maybe it was time they got a reminder of exactly where their control ended and where mine began. I didn't react right away, and I think that's what threw them off later, because people like Ethan, guys who walk around in press shirts talking about standards, they expect either compliance or confrontation. They don't expect patience. But I've learned over the years, especially from my dad, that when something hits wrong, you don't swing immediately. You step back, figure out exactly what you're dealing with, and then you move once, but you move right. So that evening, instead of calling anyone or marching over to their gate demanding answers, I went inside, poured myself a cup of coffee even though it was already getting late, and pulled out the old property documents I kept in a metal cabinet in the office. My place isn't fancy, but I keep my records tight. Deeds, surveys, everything going back to when my dad first bought the land. I spread the papers out across the table, flipping through page after page, tracing lines with my finger, reconnecting with boundaries I hadn't needed to think about in years. And then I found it, the survey map. Clear as day. My property line cut right across the corner where that road sat, the same road that fed directly into their gated entrance. I leaned back in my chair, staring at it for a long second, then leaned forward again just to be sure I wasn't seeing what I wanted to see. But no, there it was. No recorded easement, no right-of-way, nothing filed. Just my land, with a road on it that a whole neighborhood depended on. That's when I remembered something my dad told me years ago, sitting out on the porch one night. He said, that developer came by, asked if he could run a temporary access road through the corner while they were building that place next door. I told him fine, long as it stayed temporary. I never thought much about it after that. Things get built, people move in, and over time temporary turns into permanent if nobody challenges it. But now someone had given me a reason to look again. I sat there, tapping my fingers on the table, thinking about that yellow notice, about my gate lying in pieces outside, about Ethan standing there talking about visual flow, like my property was some kind of eyesore he had the authority to fix. And slowly, piece by piece, a plan started forming. Not out of anger, not exactly, more like alignment. Like everything was finally lining up in a way that made sense. The next morning, I was up early, earlier than usual, the kind of early where the air still feels cool and quiet, and I drove straight into the county office. Now, if you've never dealt with county paperwork before, it's not exactly a fast or friendly process, but if you show up prepared, respectful, and patient, you can get a lot done. I walked in with my documents, my survey, everything organized, and sat down with a clerk named Denise, mid-50s, sharp eyes, the kind of person who's seen every type of situation come through that office. I explained what I needed, asked about land use clarification, property access rights, and whether there was any official easement recorded for that road. She pulled up the records, clicked through a few screens, and after a couple minutes she looked up at me and said, "There's nothing here granting public or private access across your parcel." I nodded slowly, like I already knew, but hearing it confirmed, that carried weight. "So legally," I asked, keeping my tone even, "that road is just sitting on my land?" She gave a small shrug. "From what I can see, yes." I thanked her, filed a formal land use clarification request just to lock everything in clean, and by late morning, I had paperwork in hand that made it official, no ambiguity, no gray area. Driving back home, I kept thinking about how quickly things can flip, how one decision, one overstep, can shift the balance completely. They thought they were enforcing standards, but what they actually did was wake up a part of the situation they never bothered to check. I pulled into my driveway, still wide open, still missing that gate, and instead of feeling frustrated, I felt focused. That afternoon, I made a call to a fencing and barrier company about an hour out, told them exactly what I needed. Concrete barriers, solid, tall enough to stop any vehicle from pushing through, and I needed them delivered same day. The guy on the other end paused for a second, probably trying to figure out if I was serious, then said he could have a crew out by late afternoon. Good, I said, I'll be here. While I waited, I walked the edge of the property where the road cut through, measuring distances, marking spots, visualizing how it would look, not out of spite, but out of intention. If I was going to do this, it had to be clean, legal, and undeniable. Around 4 o'clock, I heard the rumble of a flatbed coming down the road. Big truck, dust kicking up behind it, followed by a smaller pickup with a couple workers. They pulled up, stepped out, and one of them walked over, looking at the area. "You're the one who called about the barriers?" he asked. I nodded. "That's right." He glanced at the road, then back at me. "You sure about this?" I handed him a copy of the survey and the paperwork from the county. He looked it over, let out a low whistle, and said, "Well, it's your land." I gave a small nod. "Exactly." And just like that, they got to work. There's something about watching something physical take shape. Concrete blocks being lifted, set down one by one, each one changing the reality of a space that people had taken for granted for years. The sun was starting to dip again, shadows stretching long across the ground, and with each barrier placed, that open, easy access they'd been enjoying started turning into a wall, literal and symbolic. A couple cars slowed down as they approached, drivers confused, some rolling down windows to ask what was going on. I kept it simple. Private property. Access is closed. Some of them looked annoyed, some just surprised, but none of them had an answer for it, because deep down, they knew, or at least they could feel, that something about this wasn't theirs to argue. By the time the last barrier was set, it was nearly dark, 8-foot solid concrete, lined across the road like it had always been meant to be there. I walked over, took a step back, and looked at it, then grabbed a sign I'd picked up earlier and mounted it right in the center. Private property. No trespassing. Simple. Clear. Final. That night was quiet, almost too quiet. But the next morning, that's when everything hit. I was out by the workshop, working on a truck, when I started hearing it. Engines slowing, doors opening, voices carrying across the distance. I walked up toward the edge of the property and looked out, and there they were. Cars lined up along the highway, people getting out, some dressed for work, some holding coffee cups, all of them staring at that wall like it had appeared overnight, which, in their world, it had. A woman in heels was arguing with a delivery driver who was shaking his head, pointing at the barriers. A couple kids stood near the edge of the road, backpacks on, looking confused about where their bus was supposed to stop now. And further back, I could see more cars arriving, slowing, backing up, the kind of slow-building mess that doesn't explode all at once, but spreads, layer by layer. I leaned against the fence, arms crossed, just watching, not with satisfaction exactly, but with a kind of quiet acknowledgement. This is what happens when assumptions go unchecked. Around mid-morning, a black SUV pulled up fast, stopping harder than it needed to, doors swung open, and out stepped Ethan Caldwell. Even from a distance, you could feel the energy, tight, controlled, but barely holding. He walked straight toward me, not even glancing at anyone else. His focus locked in like this was something he could still manage if he just said the right words. When he got close enough, he didn't waste time. "You need to remove those barriers," he said, voice sharp, trying to carry authority. I didn't move from where I was leaning. "Morning to you too," I replied, calm, steady. He ignored that. "You're obstructing access to a residential community. That's illegal." I pushed off the fence slowly, reached into my back pocket, and pulled out the folded survey. "This road sits on my land," I said, holding it out just enough for him to see. "There's no easement, no agreement, nothing that gives you the right to use it." He glanced at the paper, then back at me, jaw tightening. "That's not how this works," he snapped. I tilted my head slightly. Funny, that's exactly what I thought when I saw my gate in pieces. That landed. You could see it in his face, that flicker of realization that this wasn't a simple situation he could talk his way through. He tried again, tone shifting just a bit. "Look, if there's been a misunderstanding, we can address it. But you can't just shut down access like this." I let a small pause hang there, just long enough. "I didn't shut anything down," I said. "I just reclaimed what's mine." And for the first time since he walked up, he didn't have a quick response. For a few seconds, Ethan just stood there, like his brain was trying to catch up to a reality he hadn't planned for. and I could almost see the shift happening behind his eyes, the moment where confidence turns into calculation. He straightened up a bit, adjusted his sleeves like that alone might give him back some control, and said, "You're making a mistake here." I let out a quiet breath through my nose, not annoyed, not amused, just steady. "No," I said. "The mistake was thinking you could come onto my land, tear down something I built, and I'd just, thank you for it." His jaw tightened again, but this time there was something else mixed in pressure. Not just from me, but from everything building up behind him. You could hear it in the distance, horns, voices, people getting more frustrated by the minute. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This was inconvenience, disruption, the kind of thing that spreads fast in a neighborhood that's used to everything running smooth. He took a step closer, lowered his voice a bit. "Let's be reasonable," he said. "We can fix the gate. We can—" I cut him off, not raising my voice, just firm. "You already made your move." That landed harder than anything else, because it was true, whatever this was now. It didn't start with me. He looked at me for another second, then turned slightly, glancing back toward the road like he was measuring how bad things were getting. And they were getting bad fast. By midday, the situation had escalated into something nobody in that neighborhood could ignore. Cars were backed up along the highway. People were parking wherever they could find space and walking in, half a mile in some cases, dressed for office jobs, not exactly built for that kind of trek. Delivery trucks were turning around, refusing to even attempt it. I watched one guy in a uniform argue with a resident for a solid 5 minutes before just throwing his hands up and driving off. And then came the part one knew would really shake things loose: emergency services. Around early afternoon, a county fire vehicle pulled up, lights on but no siren, just enough to signal that this wasn't routine. 2 officials stepped out, walked the line of barriers, then made their way over to me. One of them, older guy, calm but direct, said, "We've got reports that this access point is being blocked." "That true?" I nodded. "It is." He looked at the barriers, then back at me. "You understand this affects emergency response times for that entire community?" I held his gaze, respectful but unmoved. "I do, but this is private property. There's no legal access recorded through here." He exchanged a glance with the other guy, then asked, "You got documentation for that?" I handed him the same paperwork I showed Ethan. He read it carefully, slower than Ethan had, and after a moment, he handed it back. "Well," he said, exhaling slightly, "this complicates things." "It didn't have to," I replied. He gave a small nod, like he understood more than he was saying, then turned back toward the road. "We'll have to report this up," he added. "There'll be follow-up." "That's fine," I said. And just like that, the situation officially moved from neighborhood dispute to something bigger. By that evening, it had already started spreading online. Someone had taken a picture, probably one of the residents, and posted it with some caption about being locked out of their own community. But the internet does what it always does: it digs. Within hours, more details came out about the gate, about the HOA, about the fact that they had removed private property without permission. And once that narrative took hold, it flipped. Fast. People weren't seeing a stubborn landowner anymore. They were seeing a group that overstepped, got comfortable, and then got checked. By the next morning, a local news van was parked down the road. Reporters standing there, camera rolling, talking about property rights, community disputes, and how a private access conflict had effectively cut off an entire residential area. I stayed out of the frame, didn't need to be part of the show. The facts were enough. And then, right on schedule, the tone shifted again. That afternoon, I got a call. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. "This is Daniel Reeves," I said. There was a brief pause, then a different voice, calmer than Ethan's, older, measured. "Mr. Reeves, this is Margaret Hill. I'm on the HOA board." I leaned back in my chair, already knowing where this was going. "What can I do for you, Margaret?" She cleared her throat slightly. "We'd like to request a meeting. As soon as possible." I glanced out the window toward the road, still blocked, still causing problems. "About the access?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "And the gate situation." I let a small silence sit there, just long enough. "Tomorrow morning," I said. "Here." They showed up right on time. Not just Margaret, but 2 other board members, and Ethan. He looked different, same clothes, same posture, but the edge was gone, replaced by something tighter, contained. We sat down at a table in my workshop, nothing fancy, just wood, tools hanging on the walls, the smell of metal and oil still in the air. Margaret took the lead. "Mr. Reeves," she began, "we want to resolve this situation quickly and fairly. What happened with your gate? That shouldn't have occurred without proper communication." That was about as close to an apology as she was going to get, at least at first. I nodded once. "It shouldn't have occurred at all," I said. She accepted that with a small tilt of her head. "We're prepared to have the gate rebuilt," she continued, "exactly as it was. At our expense. We'll also cover any additional damages." I glanced at Ethan briefly. He didn't look at me. "And the road?" I asked. She folded her hands. "We'd like to establish a formal easement. Long-term, with compensation, monthly, structured, legally binding." There it was. The part they should have handled 20 years ago, now coming back around with a price tag attached. I leaned back slightly, thinking it through, not because I didn't know my answer, but because I wanted them to sit in it for a moment. "Here's how this goes," I said finally. "You rebuild my gate exactly how it was. Same design, same name across the top. You put it in writing that no one from your HOA touches it again without my explicit consent. Ever." Margaret nodded. "That's reasonable." I continued. "Then, we talk about the easement. 99 years. Monthly fee. And it's not small." She didn't flinch. "We understand." I looked at Ethan then, just for a second. "And one more thing," I added. "This doesn't get spun into some mutual misunderstanding. What happened happened." Margaret gave a slow nod. "Agreed." And just like that, it was settled. A week later, the barriers came down, but not before the paperwork was signed, sealed, and recorded. And a few days after that, a crew showed up, not to tear something down this time, but to build it back. I watched them work from a distance, measuring, welding, assembling, and when it was done, when they lifted that arch into place, my family name cut clean across the top, just like before, it felt right again. Not because it looked the same, but because the meaning behind it had changed. Now it stood for something more than just a boundary. It stood for a line that got crossed and then redrawn. Every now and then, I'll see Ethan drive past, slower than he used to. And he always looks, just for a second, at the gate, at the name, at the thing he thought he could erase. Funny how that works. But here's the thing I still think about sometimes. Yeah, I got my gate back, I got the easement locked in, and in the end, everything worked out in my favor, but it didn't have to go that way. One conversation, 1 ounce of respect, and none of this would have happened. So I'll leave it at that. If you were in my position, would you have done the same thing, or would you have handled it differently? And more importantly, where do you draw the line when someone decides they have a say over something that's yours? Let me know in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think.